Welcome back to The Closer Cut with me, Waseem Mirza, the show where we get straight to the point with people who actually have something worth saying. Today, the other Michael Jackson. The name gets attention, of course, but what happens after the introduction is why we're here, though. Over 3,000 events, personalized stories about business change, and a track record of making audiences actually do something differently. Michael is available to book, of course, through the Closer Speakers Consultancy. Details are on your screen. Now, let's cut through the noise and find out what makes him tick. I've always wanted to say this. Michael Jackson, welcome to the Closer Cut.
Waseem, thank you very much indeed. And what a privilege to be with you, sharing this brief time together. Um, it's amazing listening to you talking about 3,000 events and, 46 countries and that kind of thing. But that's been my speaking career, and it's been an intriguing journey throughout. I traditionally speak on business change and trends and those kinds of things. And, my wife figured out the other day that that time spent in conferences amounted to some 7.5 years of me being in darkened conference rooms. Can you believe that?
That's pretty amazing. I was going to ask you, how did you end up with that name, the other Michael Jackson? And when did you realize it could be a useful part of your identity rather than just a useful conversation starter?
Well, it's been both a blessing and a curse, Wasim, to be honest. I mean, the singer was 4 years old when I was born, so nobody knew. But most speakers, obviously, as you know well, have their name with a .com. And when I checked for it, clearly michaeljackson.com was taken. So some wag at the time suggested, why don't I become the other Michael Jackson? And I did, and it stuck. But it has been both a blessing and a curse.
I'm very, very honored. Thank you very much, Mr. President and Mrs. Reagan.
You were featured not too long ago in what's called the Inner Circle Showcase, which I remember hosting. Now, for people who saw you there or are hearing about it for the very first time, what do you most want them to remember about what you actually do?
Well, the key thing for me as a keynote speaker is that I deliver a talk that's personalized to suit the audience. So I'm very intrigued because of my strategic background before all those years of being a speaker. I need to be engaged in understanding what the company wants, understanding what the reason for their gathering is, what the audience's mindset is coming into the room, and how I can actually help be a part of that overall event. So everything I do is personalized at that level. There's no cookie cut keynote at that level. It's always highly personalized to suit exactly what the client and the audience require.
There sure is, and as you know, anything can happen, and it's how we deal with that moment in practice, isn't it?
Oh gosh, I mean, backstage, you can imagine with my name, all kinds of crazy things happen, but I could tell you those for about 4 hours, and we don't have time for that. But I think that in terms of what people don't see is the preparation, the stuff that goes into an event. I've just finished an event that was held in London recently. The fourth year in a row that particular client had booked me, and I ran, as well as speaking at it, 3 days of event time for them during a conference gathering. And no, the reason the client rebooked me, I guess, at that level was my ability to work with all the other speakers as well as the client's story that they required that I could generate for them and tell from the platform. But the key thing was really that I probably spent, with the time I had on stage, about 150 to 180 hours of preparation, making sure that everything was absolutely seamless. So that as the MC, as well as a keynote speaker, I was aware well in advance of what every other speaker was presenting on, and also how it all fitted together. So I even helped the client shape the agenda. Pretty similar, I guess, Wasim, to the way that you work when you work as an MC or facilitator of an event as well. There's a lot of background prep.
Now, in a world that keeps throwing change at organizations faster than most people can absorb it, me included, that feels especially useful right now. And that's also something which is right up your street, isn't it?
It certainly is. And, I've always believed that a problem that's fully understood is already half solved. And therefore, if we know, both as speakers and facilitators or masters of ceremony, that we're going into something that is absolutely being controlled before it even begins, we know exactly what happens at any individual moment when the agenda starts being unpacked live. I think it helps us as speakers and MCs, but I think it more or less helps the audience and the client as well really get full value for money. You know, when engagement in conferencing, Waseem, is something that everyone's talking about at the moment and the big buzzword of that. And I think that when we're fully engaged with both the client and the audience, we're able to deliver a much more professional presentation or delivery across the board. Well, but you say there are three things that are certain for humans, and that's death, taxes, and change. And although every year when the Oxford English Dictionary comes out, I've always looked every year feverishly under change in case it said, see the other Michael Jackson for further instructions. And I think I've come to the realization now that it never will. But change is ever present. And the more important factor about change is that people resist it. What we need to be aware of, and particularly those of us who speak on that business subject, are we've got to make that change understandable, relatable, and accessible to the audiences that we're privileged to address.
Now, if I stopped someone in the street and said, explain what you do in one sentence and make it sound interesting, what would you say to them?
Oh gosh, I've never been asked that individual question before. What would I say? I would probably say, I help people make sense of their business futures in a way that they're looking forward to the journey and feel successful whilst taking that journey on.
Well, that's a very good answer. What's the most ridiculous assumption that people make when they hear your name?
I've heard every joke you could possibly imagine. And look, let me just tell you then a crazy story about arriving in Dubai on one of my very first trips there. And I do work all over the world. But I went out to do some work with the owners of a very prestigious set of hotels, including the Burj Al Arab. And they put me in there to stay the morning that I landed for the first night to recover and chill from the Emirates flight. As we drove in, and you're picked up at the airport in a white Rolls Royce and cross the island getting into that spectacular hotel, I noticed that the porte cochere around the entrance was just heaving with people. And I said to the driver, is it usually this busy? And he said, no, sir, I have no idea what's going on. What I and he didn't realize that morning was that as I was landing into Dubai airport, the GM on duty that morning had looked through the arriving guest list and seen Michael Jackson was checking in, which would have been quite natural for the singer, and this is quite a few years ago when he was alive. So he decided in his infinite service wisdom to line up over 150 members of hotel staff, because they know what time you're arriving, to line them up around the porte cochere to sing Michael Jackson as he climbed out of the car, "We are the world. We are the children." And sure enough, the driver came round and opened the car door for me. Boom, everyone burst into song. And I climbed out of the car and they were thinking, well, the bodyguard's here, but where's the singer? They were totally embarrassed when they found out it was me. And they did, though, in all intents and purposes, finish the song with gusto. And I have to tell you that I joined in and enjoyed it myself.
But that's so great to know. And what a welcome that you had there.
It was amazing.
Now, when you're at your best on stage, what's the shift that you want people to feel when they leave the stage?
Well, I've mentioned the word engage before, and that is a bit of a cliche, but I want them to feel involved. I want them to feel that they've heard a story that relates to them in their way, that not only can they understand, but they've learned something definitive from. And for the most part, it generally happens. The weird thing about it, as you get, no doubt, because of your profile and your career on stage as well as broadcasting, I think that people come up to you at airports when they recognize you. And of course, we know the audience is largely in the dark. And I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people. So you're never quite sure who they are when they come up and go, Michael Jackson or Waseem Mirza, you spoke at our conference. And I have to go, yes, 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 I did. Because honestly, having never met them whilst on stage, or even met them briefly during coffee or the reception before or after, it really is hard to remember the names and faces of over 100,000 people. I'm sure you'll agree.
Absolutely. And yet Yet many of them instinctively recognize your voice, and no doubt around the world they know your voice because it's so distinctive, isn't it?
As my wife says, I have a great face for radio. Another another great anecdote. I was sitting with Tom Peters. He and I were working between cities, and he was my hero growing up, the author of In Search of Excellence back in the 80s, who defined customer service. And in the 80s, he stalked stages across the world and his home in America, charging 90,000 US dollars for 45 minutes. And I had the privilege of working with him, my hero, at that level. And we were sitting in an airport lounge between these two cities that we were flying to. I, as being all deference, had gone to get him a cappuccino. And as I gave it to him and sat down at the table, I said to him, Tom, do you still get recognized a hell of a lot? Do people come over to you? And he said, no, it doesn't happen that much. But as he said that, perfect timing. Some chap made eye contact, saw us sitting there, came wandering over. And I said to Tom Peters, I said, get ready, you're signing your first autograph. I hope you got a spare copy of your books. And he said, I'll just sign whatever he wants, but let's be, so I'm okay about it. And this chap walked over and he said, Michael Jackson, you spoke at our Dulux conference 5 years ago, and I remember every word you said. And Tom Peters said, he's a plant. You've put him there. He's done that deliberately, and you sorted that out. And I swear to you, I had not done it, and it was one of the most incredible feelings I've ever had backstage. I think it's always the audience reaction that gets me every time. When, as you do, we get great reviews on engagement surveys that come back in. And we almost expect that as a matter of course, because we're professionals at it and we don't have failures, or please goodness, we don't expect to have failures. But I think when that audience, you see the light bulb going on. And for me, engagement really comes in for, I have dialogue with my audiences. It's not monologue. I'm not preaching from stage. I like to ask my audience stuff in real time, and I take their answers using a handheld in my hand, and they're able to sort of use a desktop messaging service to get questions directly through to me, and I can answer them live and shape keynotes for them live and in real time. And that for me is an absolute joy because it helps the audience get it. And when they're involved, they feel that they're getting better value from just a speech, but they're actually involved in a conversation with somebody who allegedly knows what they're talking about.